Okay, so it's been a while since I did one of these videos where I just pick a topic or something at random, well, semi-random, that I found interesting, and I just basically talk about it for 10 minutes or so, maybe a little bit more. But there's not really going to be any super interesting visuals since it's such a long video, and unless I feel really dedicated to the topic, so this video might be one that you might just prefer to listen to in the background while you're doing other things. So the post I picked this time, as you can probably see on the screen, is the top-down versus bottom-up method development strategies post I made in August 14th, 2017, so almost, 7 months ago at the time I'm recording this. So, to dive into the topic, the idea behind this post is that most methods are based around one main idea. So, say with CFOP, that would be F2L. With RU, that would be LSE. With ZZ, that would be ZZF2L. That sort of thing. So the one idea which really the whole rest of the method is based around. Now, I know you can debate what the best step of that method might be. So, say, with RU, you probably could find people who argue that first two blocks are the better step of the method, all of that sort of thing. So, but for the sake of this video, I'm just going to go with the classification that say RU is top-down. Most of the other common ones are bottom-up. And that leads us to the distinction I made between methods which have their best step at the start, so which I refer to as bottom-up. So say CFOP, where the F2L is the core idea, SSC, where the first phase, where you orient everything, is the best idea, and ZZ, where ZZF2L is the main idea. And methods which have the best step at the end. So say LSE for RU, CELL for MCell, and Redux if you want a non-3x3 example, and I refer to those as top-down. And top-down is where the last step is the best. So, as I said before, there are definitely ways you can argue against classifying one method as one thing, another method as another thing, all of that sort of thing. So, you might have, say, people, like I said before, people arguing that RU is actually a bottom-up because of the first two blocks, but that doesn't really matter at the moment. There are also examples where you can blur the line, so say with SSC, where when I was coming up with it at least, the main idea was that last phase, where you had everything oriented, so in theory it would be easy, but now, as it's turned out, it's actually better to do the first phase, because you can do it under 20 moves, which is, if I say so myself, surprisingly efficient, and now there are dozens and dozens of last step phases where, with no real idea of which ones are good or not, or really, if I'm honest, if there is a good order anyway. So, I'm going to make a few observations, or at least I'm going to record some of the observations I made when I came up with this idea. So, bottom-up methods like CFOP, ZZ, Petrus, all of that, have lots and lots of improvements, subsets, extensions, whatever you want to call them, that you can learn. Like, say, if we just take CFOP as one example, there's VHLS ZBLL, there's OLLPL, there's CLL, ELL, there is Simple, there is Fish and Chips, there are dozens of different last layer variations. Now, my reasoning for this was that you have the first phase, which in the case of CFOP would be the F2L, in ZZ it would be ZZF2L, in Petrus it would be the block and all of that. And since that first stage is fixed, you have a lot of different options for what you can do to finish it, because that you're not restricted, because that is the step you need to improve, really, for it to become a really, really, really good method. So there are lots and lots of different ideas, because you're not deviating from that core first step. Now, this contrasts with the top-down methods, like roux, because off the top of my head, I cannot really think of any very good roux variations that are comparable to, say, VHLS ZBLL in C4, or maybe ZBLS ZBLL would be slightly more appropriate. And I think that's because you have one core step at the end that you're aiming towards. So with, say, roux, to use that example, you have first block, second block, CMLL. All of those are to get you to the LSC step as quickly as you possibly can. And there isn't really very much variation on that because it is fixed. There is no real way to vary that, because you end up with, say, only PCMS, which is a method similar to roux in approach and style. But again, it's essentially just getting to that LSE step as quickly as possible, and there's much, much fewer ways there are to do that than to, say, complete the cube after F2L. Now, one other thing that's interesting is that 3x3 is really the only puzzle that seems to have both top-down methods and bottom-up methods. Now, I think that's because 3x3 is complex in a way, but not super complex. So a human can reasonably well use their intuition on a 3x3, but they can't use their intuition to solve the whole thing, or they can't memorize an alg set that solves, say, half the cube. So if we take 2x2 for an example, with small puzzles, at least, it's easy to get the puzzle to a state where you can learn every single case. Like, say, with EG, all you need to build is a face, and a face is easy to build to, and then you can suddenly solve more than half of the rest of the cube with one alg that you've memorized. Now, 3x3, you can't really do that because, as I said, you need a lot more solved before you can memorize all the cases, because one look last layer, which is maybe a third of the cube, well, arguably slightly more, that already requires so many algs that really it's out of the grasp of almost all solvers, even if they wanted to. Well, I'm sure that statement will be proved wrong in a few years, like ZBLL was, but I'm going to stick with it for now. Now, conversely, on big cubes, you have a top-down approach because you want to get to a stage where it's easy enough to work out, but there aren't really all that many ways to do it. So basically every big cube method is a reduction method, including Yao, Hoya, all of that. The one exception maybe being K4, or, well, K whatever size puzzle you want. But in general, it is top-down. So you have a reduction to a 3x3 stage, because the 3x3 stage is the core concept, and the 3x3 stage is really when humans can start thinking about it, and that makes most big cubes top-down. And you can't, say, build large portions of it that efficiently because there's only so many pieces you can really focus on at a time. Now, 3x3 is slightly different to that, in that it's got few enough pieces that humans can really think their way through it, and block building becomes reasonably efficient without being frivolous like you would have on 2x2, or without being really long, drawn out, and not very easy as you would on, say, 6x6, because you don't need to solve as much of the cube before you can get to something useful. Now, one exception I'll put to most other puzzles being top-down as Megaminx, because Megaminx seems to be more bottom-up, but then at the same time you can also build to a certain stage more easily on Megaminx, because block building is reasonably easy as there's only a certain number of layers that you have to deal with. So, moving on. Now, good or popular or whatever sort of method you like say CFOP, Roux, ZZ, no matter whether they are top down or bottom up, all seem to solve the same number of things, I'm going to call it. So permutations, orientations, centers. So say with CFOP you have, when solving F2L, you have 8 permutations and 8 orientations. With Roux you have 6 orientation. Roux in LSC you have 6 orientations, 6 permutations and 6 centers. With ZZ you have 10 permutations and 4 orientations to solve. So really you have more or less the same number of pieces. This actually fits in quite nicely with my thoughts on why 3x3 has a certain number of variation, has both top-down and bottom-up, because these are large enough sections of the cube to be useful to solve at a time, but also they're not too big that you can't really comprehend. So another thing to back that up is if you look at the converse, less successful quote-unquote methods like FreeFop and 2GL and anything that reduces to 2GLL, like I've said, either ask too much or too little of their solvers. So with FreeFop, the free F2L is the main idea, where you have to solve 8 permutations, 8 orientations, 6 centers, which arguably is too much pressure on a human's somewhat limited thinking capacity. Because if you could do that, then you'd have Roux solvers solving F2B every solve and predicting CML, which you don't, because that would require so much training. It's not really useful. And conversely, when you have 2GLL, you only solve 4 permutations of 4 orientations, so you have a reduced alg set, though it's not really taking full advantage of the human's intuition or memorization abilities for alg sets. And this is also similar because a lot of methods' quote-unquote best steps seems to be somewhat intuitive. So although it does sort of lead into a grey area. So with CFOP you have F2L, which is mostly intuitive, but you learn ALGs for bad cases. With LSC you learn EOLR, which technically is ALGs, but really it's still somewhat intuitive, because you can actually understand the ALGs rather than with, say, CFOP, where you have to really deconstruct the ALGs before you understand it. One exception I'll say to that is ZB, because ZB is purely algorithmic in its best steps, so really you can't say much about it. In addition, to get good at most of these steps, most of these core steps, you need to be able to do it brain dead. So say you can do F2L without really thinking about it, you can do LSE without really thinking about it, all of that sort of stuff. But to past a certain point, you do need to start getting creative, like how in Roux you can influence 4C during 4B, or with CFOP you can use multi-slotting in F2L. So to a certain point you need to stop thinking, but then to get past that point, because you have built up that core baseline you can work with, then you can start adding more and more thought into it. Now, one other thing that I'll say is that it's interesting that this sort of gives an explanation as to why you can't really get a good CFOP Roux hybrid, good ZZ Roux hybrid, any of that sort of thing, because CFOP is a bottom-up method, a top-down method, Roux is a bottom-up method, and those two best steps, although it's logical to try and put them into one method, they sort of start interfering with each other. So you can't really have them work together all that harmoniously as you would with other methods, say. So those are my broad general thoughts. Again, it's debatable what the core step of a method is, but I think this is broadly applicable to most of the speed solving methods, even if you don't quite agree on which is the best. And so I think I'm going to end the video here, just rambling on this core topic. If you want me to just ramble on another topic that you think I might find interesting, feel free to send it to me somewhere, comments, whatever, on speed solving. I probably won't look at Reddit. Discord might be quite good. So that's it for today. I will see you guys later.